what we're going to talk about here, and the realistic option here is a timeshare with Miguel Amaya. It's not going to blow anyone out of the water. Welcome into Northside Territory, Foul Territory Network's Cubs podcast. I'm Sahadev Sharma with my partner Patrick Mooney. We're your Cubs beat writers for The Athletic. Patrick, let's get right to it. It is GM meetings time. We talked to Jed Hoyer already a couple times, and there are a few things we can talk about that we've gathered during our couple days here in San Antonio. I think the first is what we've kind of been talking about for, since the season ended, maybe before the season ended, and that, starting pitching will be a priority. Starting pitching is the way that this front office will look to upgrade a roster that obviously needs more wins. I'm not saying they're going to ignore the lineup, but starting pitching is an obvious path to success and improvement.
I would say it was obvious even before Cody Bellinger opted in and took out a $30 million chunk of that budget for baseball operations, right? I mean, the lineup's sort of boxed in here, or the front office is sort of boxed in with their lineup. We've talked about it for a long time. Jed and Carter, even Counsell, are not big on giving out those like 3-4 year deals to relievers. So what do you look at? It's the pitching, and the farm system is lined up in a way where they do have lots of hitters coming that they want to create some lanes for. It's not exactly clear like who, when, and how, but that cluster is there. And quite frankly, I don't think the organization's young pitchers like proved enough this past year to say like, oh, we can trust him, or him to be a fifth starter next year, much less a front of the rotation guy. And another thing too, I think it's interesting. I know you'll be getting into it in a future piece, but if the Cubs thought their offense was better than it performed at Wrigley Field, they also have to acknowledge that their pitching probably overachieved last year, right?
Yeah, I think that's the counter that we've kind of avoided, right? We haven't talked enough about that. I think we kind of touched on it, and one thing I realized was, like Jameson Taillon has massive splits, home road splits, right? He struggled at home. I looked at his career. That's kind of the norm. Like he struggles at home, struggles on the road, and does well at home. I'm not sure if I said the opposite when talking about that originally, but he struggles on the road, does well at home. He's more comfortable in his home ballpark for some reason. Maybe it's just randomness. Well, whatever. It's been that way since 2021. I think the person you point to that's most, like what's going on here? What do we trust is Javier Assad. Those splits are big. Like Imanaga, Steele, it's all okay. The splits aren't huge. Those are the two main guys, right? Then you go to Taillon and Assad, and you look at Assad, and this is a guy that kind of established himself as, he can give you 160 plus innings. Let's rely on him as a fifth starter. I think there's a little bit of a, squint, tilt your head, wonder what's going on. And that makes it all the more important that you have to lock in someone. Patrick, I like your idea of, hey, the Cubs kind of, Theo and Jed have always had this idea. Theo, then now Jed, have had this idea of these 9-figure guys coming every few years for the rotation. I'm not sure if we're certainly going to see that, but I do appreciate the philosophy of what you were kind of trying to present.
It sort of got shot down, but I think it was more theoretical, makes sense more than in practice for this exact offseason. I still think Max Fried makes a lot of sense. I would anticipate the Cubs have to see where that goes. I think it's a really good fit. Sort of lines up with the profile of what they like. I mean, World Series champion, comes from a winning organization, all that stuff. But in terms of that absolute top of the market, I mean, we've been given indications like that's not going to happen. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously,
Cross
not
Corbin
one,
Burnes off your
yeah,
list.
yeah. Like that's not even like, oh well, him and Council work together. Like, no, like that's not how this is going to work. And Blake Snell, we're assuming won't get the type of deal that Burnes will. But I don't think he's the guy that's going to light up the Ivy system in terms of control, command, his year-to-year variance, just an overall reliability factor. I don't really see the Cubs going there. So then it's kind of Fried or that next tier, which they've been good at. But it is a weird sort of like, we're not even done with the GM meetings and we're just kind of crossing off a lot of stuff for a big market team that has payroll flexibility and a very good farm system and a pretty good major league nucleus.
Yeah, it's we've touched on it so much, but I like it hurts for fans to like enter the offseason and be like, well, we know we aren't shopping there at the very top, and to cross off the superstars almost immediately is a frustration. One way that the Cubs can improve their lineup is kind of solidifying the catching spot. Again, this is something we've talked about since July.
Yeah.
We're getting a little more clarity there. First of all, I think it's important to we talked a lot about like them trading for this big, impactful, established catcher. I think as we get into the offseason, we're realizing like that's going to be near impossible, if not just flat out impossible. Like Logan O'Hoppe wasn't realistic at the deadline as much as Jed may have tried. It seems like that's going to be the same case. One name that has come up on the internet circles, and I think we may have mentioned on the podcast, was Cal Raleigh. No, like Seattle isn't going to trade this impactful catcher that's in the prime of his career. If they want to get creative and try and get a young catcher, like a prospect, maybe, but I think what we're going to talk about here and the realistic option here is a timeshare with Miguel Amaya, and there are some solid names there. It's not going to blow anyone out of the water, but what you want is some stability and some trust and someone that, a veteran presence to kind of make sure that Miguel Amaya isn't overexposed and you can try and play pitching matchups. It won't be left-right matchups as much as just like maybe skill set matchups. But there are some veteran names there that would make you feel a little bit more comfortable about the spot.
Yeah, this is not really one where it's like criticizing ownership or the front office for a lack of conviction or imagination or resources. It's just these guys are really hard to find. I don't think the Cubs are going to trade for Wilson Contreras. Let's throw that cross that name off the list as well. But yeah, when it's such a premium position that I think the two or three takeaways we had on the catching front was Miguel Amaya is not viewed as a number one starting catcher. Right? That's sort of obvious, but they're not going to like go out of their way to like kind of give him wider berth here. That it's going to be at least kind of a co-catcher here. That free agent list is like, okay, the Travis d'Arnaud's, the Danny Jansen's, the Carson Kelly's, like that with another step from Maya would be an upgrade at a spot that was like maybe 30 out of 30 for a big portion.
For a big chunk, yeah.
Or, whatever, a third of the season, near the bottom of the majors, if not almost half season in that, kind of bottom third. So that would be a substantial improvement, especially if you get a guy who can contribute on both sides of the ball, that if he does click with some pitchers or help the bullpen come together a little faster and just adds a little more thump towards the bottom of the lineup, which I think is something you'd written about at length of like what happened in that second half with the offense. It was Dansby finally getting on track, PCA becoming this, dynamic presence, and Miguel Amaya making some significant in-season adjustments to his credit to become like a credible offensive presence.
Right. And I don't think it's ripping Miguel Amaya. There's just so few of
No.
those guys,
Yeah.
right? It's just there's that isn't those guys aren't prevalent across the game, and that's why it's hard to find them in free agency because they very rarely hit free agency, and that's why it's hard to trade for them because nobody's gonna trade them because they cling to them. That's why you kind of have to get a prospect. So I wouldn't rule that out. And I think when people hear that, they're like, well, don't they have their own prospect? What about Moises Ballesteros? Look, I don't think there's any doubt that they're in love with his bat, and why wouldn't you be? Like, there's a reason he's on top 100 prospect list. When people are like, can he stick a catcher? Usually that means you're not going to make the top 100 prospect list. You have to be a no crap catcher. His bat is that special that they're high on it. They love the offense, everything about that bat. It's a well-rounded, dangerous bat. Everything we understand is that, while he's improved there, they don't envision everyday catcher status down the road, even down the road, right? Like maybe he can help out at that position, but he's a prospect. He's in this system, and they like him for his offense. So that he's and I think like that's not just like an internal evaluation.
Right.
It's kind of how the league sees him. So his value is his offense. That's how he's going to eventually help this team. Maybe as soon as like June or July or something like that. We'll see. He's young still. But I don't think you can count on him being developed into the everyday catcher. So that is a question. And I don't know if it'll get answered this offseason, but it'll remain a question as far as can they find like that 120, 130 start catcher. Maybe they're going to be timeshare for a little while longer, but absolutely. And you mentioned his name. I think Darno hitting the market is a huge boon for them because it gives them another really solid option with Danny Jansen and Carson Kelly. Like those three names, I think we just focus on that. It would, we don't have like solid info that those are the three guys that they're hellbent on. But I think like when you look at their history and what they're looking for and all the signs, like one of those three names makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think one theory I had heard was for Moises to, start next year at AAA Iowa. The Cubs will added some sort of like minor league depth, maybe a defense first veteran guy who could work with him and help him on that side of the game. And the Cubs also hired a catching guru, right, Sahadev, away from the Rockies.
Yeah, Jury. I believe it's pronounced Weinstein.
Okay.
Older guy that is just revered for his ability to work with catchers. I'm sure he will. That's part of the puzzle there, like to get Ballesteros to a point where, again, is it everyday status? Likely not. Very likely not. But can he help catch? What can he be a third catcher like that? That's valuable, right? Like
that is no doubt.
If you're impactful DH / I catch one time through the rotation or give guys a break in a blowout, whatever it may be, that's valuable because that also keeps them fresh and allows that offense to not dip. Because what's the biggest issue with catchers and their offense? That they get ground down over the course of the season and they can't hit because their lower body is just shot, right? And like that's what happens to catchers a lot. Like there's so rare that you can find these guys that help on both sides of the ball and catch every day. So it's an interesting theory. We'll see how it all plays out there.
Yeah, I mean his position is hitter, right?
Yeah,
This dude's 20 years old, raking Double-A Tennessee, Iowa, Arizona Fall League, and I realize some of those numbers could be inflated for various reasons, and there's still a huge leap to go for him in terms of future competition. But like, man, a left-handed hitter, the way the Cubs talk about him leaves like no doubt that they are extremely high on his offensive ceiling. And you've made the point as well, Sahadev, that defensive growth can come later or more incrementally for a catcher, right? And so that you give him some of that time to figure it out. His offense, you highly expect that his offense will carry you at stretches, and then see how the rest of the kind of lineup and roster shakes out for a manager who does love kind of playing the long game and finding matchups and really highlighting rest and recovery for his everyday guys. All right, Sahadev, what do we got on Nico Hoerner? Should Cubs fans expect him in Japan for opening day?
I mean, it seems like it's similar to what we've heard since we heard about the surgery, right? Like the time, like this doesn't sound like a timeline where they're worried about him not, outside of setbacks or whatever. As long as there's no setbacks and it's a normal recovery, they're not worried about him, like, not showing up till June or July or something like that. But especially with that early opening day, it may be pushing it for him to be ready for opening day, or maybe he's ready right at opening day. Like it's not like there's kind of like this window that sounds like a few weeks to a month of where he could like show up. Like maybe he misses like the first couple of weeks of the season, but this is this is not something that where they're concerned long-term about his recovery. They're not concerned about the type of player he'll end up being. Like they kind of knew about this, right? Well, it's not 100% clear if they definitely knew about this when it initially happened, as much as it is like he kind of knew about this and then pushed through and played. And it did. I don't think this was. I think the other injuries that occurred probably impacted his play more than this one. What this impacted sounds like was his throwing. It did. I guess you could go back and watch clips, but he just wasn't the same type of player. But that doesn't impact him as much at second base, right? Like that's you need an arm to turn that double play sometimes. But I think you could see that he was still an elite glove there and then was able to make the plays at that position.
Yeah, maybe he just didn't have quite the same zip on his throws, and Jed indicated that it was roughly half the season, maybe more, in terms of bothering Nico, not to the point where he had to shut it down. But the idea is that this surgery will allow him to, consistently and fully play shortstop at a high level should the Cubs need him to step in for Dansby Swanson. That's also something that other teams may take notice. I still have a hard time thinking that some team is going to blow the Cubs away with an offer, or that the Cubs are going to kind of get the right value on a guy who's recovering for surgery with no timeline until he shows up for spring training. But it's an interesting thought exercise. It's something that I'm sure will be bandied about at times, but this could create an opportunity for a young player, or I think the Cubs may try to address their bench. What are you hearing, Sahadev?
Yeah, I mean, they don't have, like, I mean, do they have a left-handed presence on that bench that can kind of roam the infield, right? Like really go around to different spots and spell Nico, spell Dansby, spell Isaac Paredes. It's a pretty right-handed group, obviously, most of the time. That's how it works. Those players, I guess we should look at the free agent list, or who are these utility left-handed guys or switch hitting guys that could help them. I'm not sure if that's readily available on free agency, like a bench type bat, trade market, perhaps that guy's there. I do agree with you when you say like it's hard to envision someone trading for Nico when he's injured, right? Or at least giving proper value.
Exactly.
Because right, I will say this. Because of the shortstop market, which is Willy Adames, and then nothing else after that, I could squint and see a team being like, we really need a shortstop. We know, like, let's check out the medicals here. Can we go over the medicals on this? Okay, he's going to be back no later than April 15th. We're very confident in that. Or maybe it's January and like we've also heard already that this market may be slow again. This may be another slow playing market. Scott Boras has every single big name for the most part. He's going to do a Scott Boras thing, and it may be like, Willy Adames signs and teams are scrambling for shortstops, and by January the Cubs are like, okay, maybe we got to move. Maybe we have enough offers that this makes sense. They love Nico Hoerner, though. That's another thing, right? Like, you and I have talked to him 1,000 times. Like, what's not that? This is a legit good makeup guy, and he works his butt off, and that he put up the numbers that he did while kind of battling multiple little things over the course of the season, I think says a lot about him. I'm curious about depth in those areas. I think, we've kind of entered a period where we have to, like, we can keep it on our radar, but it's very I agree with you. It's probably an unlikely scenario. I'm trying to envision the scenario. That's why what I was presenting, I don't think it's likely. I agree that, like, moving Nico Hoerner just gets really hard when he's recovering from a decently significant surgery. So it does kind of hamper their ability to get creative, which brings us back to what we were talking about with the catcher spot and offense, and from the very first segment here. Like, I don't know what it's going to be, and I think we'll have to continue to dig into that. They do have to get creative, I think. I don't think you can go into next season with the same offense and have it be like, hey, we got a timeshare catcher, and here's the lineup again, and say, well, the second half was better, third in runs scored from July 1st on. I think that's going to be a hard sell. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe selling it doesn't matter. Maybe that's real, and we'll all be proven wrong that, look, this offense from May and June was the aberration, and what they are is this impactful offense. And Wrigley will play like a normal Wrigley season, and we'll all see like, oh, okay, the offense is good enough. We'll see, But I'm also not resigning myself to, like, them not trying to be creative and adjusting this offense in some way.
Yeah, I mean, it's early November. I still think going big on pitching, stretching for the bullpen, creating some opportunities for these young guys that they believe in, changing the shape of the bench. Like, I think those things could add up. It's not going to be, like, very sexy or what, Cubs fans probably want.
Yeah.
But we got to let this play out, right? I mean, the GM meetings have not ended yet, so we'll probably come back next week with kind of a overall what we learned, and maybe the tone will shift a little bit as we head in toward the holiday season.
Yep, we'll see what. Let's just hope that there's a move before Cubs convention. I think we got our first move right before Cubs convention last winter, so let's hope for that. So fans aren't in full panic mode by the new year. But yeah, that's right now what we're hearing after a couple days of the winter meetings. We'll be back early next week with a full wrap up of the week, and make sure you all have as much information as possible. Thanks so much for listening. This is Northside Territory. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Subscribe to The Athletic, where Patrick and I will be on top of this offseason that the Cubs are in the midst of or just entering. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Thanks. Take care.